So what you do, you post a video about the KHL, and you know it's going to cause some kind of stuff. So you just leave that, and then you go back to a power ranking style video. Um, about a week ago, we did the last power rankings of the regular season, and then last week got really busy, and I didn't really have a chance to go through. And I've been going through the data, and I've got all of these magnets, all of them, and I want to put them all on the board and have them all in order of each week. So each week, and we can go across where teams move to, and it's a lot of work. I did it for about a half an hour this morning before I said, all right, screw this. And I decided, you know what? We're just going to talk about the average for the year. And then we'll get into where teams were during the season, because there's some interesting things just with the average alone. Number 31, of course, Buffalo. Buffalo ended up being the lowest rated on average. Not really a surprise, I would think. At number 30, not really a surprise to see Arizona here. But remember, Arizona was at 31 for quite a while. And the fact that they moved up at all is remarkable, considering the start they had, considering how bad they were at the midway part of the season. At 29 is Montreal. Again, Montreal, it was a disastrous season. At no point during the season, I think I had them at highest 20th or 21st. That's a whole other video though, where we'll discuss who got higher and lower and who had the biggest swing from top to bottom. I will get into all of that in the coming weeks, because it's kind of fun to look at and decide who really had the worst season. The answer is Buffalo. Spoiler alert. 28, Vancouver. Again, so you're looking at just pretty poor seasons across the board for these four bottom teams, and none of them made the playoffs. The interesting thing is there are teams that are in this top 10 that actually missed the playoffs because they just fell right off the map. 27, the Oilers, who were expected to be much, much higher than 27th. And while we're all caught up in the playoffs right now, Ty Ratty has signed a one-year extension with the Oilers. And he goes from making $700,000 to $800,000. So people are going to say, who cares? But it was a two-way contract he had this season, which meant that while he was in the American League, he made $70,000 a year. Now he's on a one-way contract, meaning if he's in the minors, he still makes that $800,000. Good for him. Good work in 15 games to work yourself up to a one-way contract. In 26th, Detroit. We had expected Detroit to finish right about here. What we didn't expect was Ken Holland coming back, and that's what we're looking at. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with them in the offseason and if they make any big moves. Looking at Mr. Tavares, looking at their cap space, it's not possible right now. And I could just Tavares into almost any of these lineups. That's the funny part. 25, Ottawa. Well, the Senators ended up finishing really low overall, but it was kind of a drop at the end, and then Vancouver got better at the end, so did Edmonton. But Ottawa generally had a miserable season, and there's going to be a lot of hope that things turn around going into next season. I got to say, though, if they have to get rid of Karlsson, and I know he, it's either on Instagram or Twitter, he posted, thanks to Ottawa, blah, blah, blah. Look, until he's actually traded, I have nothing to report on. I can't report on what he's doing on social media because it doesn't mean anything until he's actually moved. To my knowledge, he hasn't sat down with Ottawa management yet. So, until that happens, and until the team and the player both say, yeah, we're going to move him, there's nothing to report. Number 24, Florida. A tremendous second half by Florida helps us forget how close they were to Detroit most of the year. It shows up here. Florida and Detroit were almost in lockstep right up till the midway part of the season, and then they diverted from one another quite dramatically. Florida looks like they're going to be solid going into next season. Right now, they're sitting at 17th on the power rankings. They're frozen there until Ratty doesn't move Edmonton up. Just so Oilers fans know, I'm not moving the Oilers up because they kept Ratty. But Florida, of the teams that missed the playoffs, they were the best team. And of course, they finished 1 point ahead of Colorado. So, cue the police that wants to destroy the playoffs and burn them and remake the entire playoffs because Florida was 1 point ahead of Colorado. When people point that out, I point out that Florida had Ottawa, Buffalo, and Montreal in their division, and Detroit. And Colorado had their worst team in their division was Chicago. So a little bit of a difference there, just a tiny bit. 23, Carolina. I know there was criticism of me at one point during the season when Carolina was playing well, and I wasn't moving them up the rankings, but it came down to shootouts, close games. Um, I never really saw anything in their game to make me say, okay, now they're getting better. Um, at one point, it looked like they might make the playoffs and maybe uh, prove some of the people who believed the playoffs were possible for them correct, but it just didn't happen. It just didn't. At 22, Rangers, another team that took kind of a nosedive this year, and there's a few of them. There's the Rangers, the Senators, the Oilers, and Montreal. Um, Various nosedives, and notice 3 of those are Canadian. Rough season for Canadian teams. Mostly, anyways. The Rangers at 22 is a bit of a surprise, although they started out really low. They went up in the middle of the season, and then they ended up really low again at the end. So 22 is where they end up. 21 is Chicago. For the Hawks, disappointing season overall. I didn't foresee this dive coming. I didn't think they were going to finish first. I had taken Nashville to finish first, but I still thought Chicago should finish second in the division, and that didn't happen. Chicago really nosedived this season, and it corresponds with Corey Crawford going down with injury, and we still don't know the state of Corey Crawford, what's going to happen with him going into the fall, and how extensive this injury really is. How career threatening is it? At 20, Colorado. So here's the first playoff team that's shown up on the board. Colorado had a good start to the season. They were rough around the middle. They ended up going on that huge winning streak, and then they dropped back. In the end, it all evens out. But still, they end up in 20th. They were 17th overall in the NHL. For Colorado, I may have underestimated them at certain points, but in the end, Colorado definitely belongs in the playoffs. I know right now they're down 2-0 as I'm recording this to Nashville, but they definitely belong there, and they've proven themselves. At 19, also a playoff team, Anaheim. The Ducks had a really rough first half of the season as well. They had a rough first half, and it was the middle that got Colorado, but second half of the season was very good for Anaheim, and they went into the playoffs on a 5-game winning streak. Did they expend too much energy in that 5-game winning streak? No. San Jose's just better than they are. And it shows on the board. You'll notice San Jose's not here. 18th, Islanders. Points in time during this season, there was some criticism that I had the Islanders too low, and then I had criticism I had the Islanders too high. In the end, the Islanders are a team with a lot of offense, an iffy defense, and iffy goaltending, and that's what cost them in the end. And for Islanders fans, if Tavares leaves, that does leave a large hole in the team. Absolutely. It's not going to be easy to replace him. 17, also a playoff team, is Philly. Philly had the worst luck in the world for about the first month of the season. No team had less luck in wins and losses than Philly. Then they had the 10-game nosedive. Then they went on the huge winning streak. Then they kind of bottomed out. Then they went, and then it's been this iffy. So the fact they lose game 1 to Pittsburgh 7-0 and they win game 2 5-1, that's Philly. Horrible, terrible, awful. Set them on fire one night and set the world on fire the next. At 16, Calgary. Oh, look at what team I dropped to. That's very interesting. We'll get to that in a sec. So Calgary had a really decent run there, and then they didn't. And their goaltending, their defense, it all let them down in the end. There are questions from Calgary fandom regarding the heart and drive of Gaudreau and Monahan. Their drive to win being in question. And I honestly, I don't have a dog in that fight, so I stay out of it. But, the fact the Flames missed the playoffs is very troubling. Because when you've got this young roster, you need to strike the iron while the iron's hot. Number 15, this is the one I dropped. Remember when I did the power rankings and it was a review video and I just took Dallas and just threw their logo on the floor. Apparently the logo just anticipated I was going to drop it. No, Dallas dropped themselves. They looked really good, and then all of a sudden they were crap. And they fought their way out of the playoffs. They decided they just didn't want to be there. I don't know where to go with this. Ken Hitchcock retiring helps because it forces Jim Nill to make a change. I don't think Hitchcock would have been replaced in the offseason, and they really needed to make a change. They absolutely had to. There was no way around it. Number 14, San Jose. The Sharks hung around right in about this spot. They were number 13 on my power rankings for weeks. So them ending up in 14th doesn't surprise me. Right now, as we speak, they're sitting in 6th. Why? Because they're up 2-0 in the playoffs over these guys. San Jose's been solid this year, and they're really solid in every area of the game. While they're not spectacular in any one area, they're really solid in every area, and that can often add to a nice playoff run. 13, Minnesota. Rough part of the year for them when everybody was hurt, much like Anaheim, and then once everybody got back, Minnesota got better. They're in tough, drawing the Winnipeg Jets in the first round, and while Leaf fans may not be happy about having to play Boston because of where Toronto finished, look where Minnesota finished, and they drew themselves a matchup with Winnipeg. So Minnesota fans have something to complain about there too if you want to talk about changing the playoff formats. You're always going to have a good team against a good team in the first round. You're always going to have a contender being out in the first round. That's how it works. And when you have a year where I think there were 11 or 12 teams that hit 100 points, yeah, it's going to look like that. That's going to happen. At number 12, Pittsburgh. The Penguins looked really kind of dead halfway through the year. And then they didn't. And they actually reached number 1 on my power rankings at one point, and I had them predicted to win the Stanley Cup at one point this year. I didn't go into the playoffs predicting them to win the Stanley Cup, but I got to admit that game 1 against Philly made me a little nervous. And I made the video that I did as kind of a joke, kind of a lark, which I know may have offended some. But you know what? At any point during the playoffs now, when Pittsburgh has a fantastic game, I can just point to that video. Somebody says, well, where's your video talking about Pittsburgh? And you go, there it is. So that's there. The Penguins definitely look solid, and they could very well win this year. Number 11, Columbus. Well, it was a rough year for Columbus in parts, but in the end, it worked out pretty well for them. They get themselves a matchup with Washington in the first round, which was advantageous in Game 1. We'll see what it does in Game 2, but Columbus at 11. They end up in the playoffs for the second year in a row for the first time in their franchise's history. Number 10, Kings. It was touch and go with the Kings at one point before the end of the season, whether or not they'd even make the playoffs. And they did, and that's good. They got to wake up against Vegas, though, or they'll be entrenched in the bottom 8 of the playoff teams on my current power rankings. Because, of course, again, I freeze the teams out of the playoffs in their ranking, and then I freeze teams that lose in the first round after they're out. So we get down to Stanley Cup final. I'm not going to do power rankings. That's ridiculous. I would think past round 2, there's no point in doing power rankings. Just isn't. Number 9, New Jersey. It's funny how this works out. So, again, during the season, certain fan bases get upset over where teams may or may not be placed. New Jersey ends up exactly where I kind of thought they would. I know I had New Jersey lower at certain points during the year because they weren't getting the wins. And when they did, it was either shootout or it was really close, and then other teams around them were winning more convincingly against maybe a better opponent, so it was hard to move them up. But New Jersey still ends up finishing 9th. 8th, Washington. The Caps would be higher if not for that 15-game period where they were kind of mediocre. And I wonder if maybe some of that lull is following them into the playoffs. We'll see. Number 7, St. Louis. They missed the playoffs. They missed the playoffs, and there they are at 7. So it was one hell of a drop for St. Louis. Like, it was massive. That they can still finish the season 7th on this thing, this average of the year, and yet they didn't make the playoffs. That game 82 against Colorado, emblematic of the season. Just, you got to win it and you're in, and they didn't. And there are a lot of reasons why, and I know that, and I'm not trying to just dump all over St. Louis, but it is shocking how much they fell. They were number 1 at one point on my power rankings. I believe they were either number 1 or number 2. I'm pretty sure at some point they hit number 1. Anyways, they were one of the best teams in the league, and then they weren't. Number 6, Boston. Yep. Boston finished 6th. And that was with, I think they had 2 or 3 weeks at number 1. And I was concerned every week they were number 1. It's weird, it's like, I cheer for this team, and then I go, oh no, they're number 1. Oh, crap. Because I don't want to appear to be favoring them and cooking it so that they're number 1. So the fact that they finished 6th for the year makes me feel somewhat better. They had a really rough start to the year. Their October was bad. And they would be higher on this chart if not for October. October was pretty darn bad. And I was kind of convinced that they weren't making the playoffs and that Dallas was my only hope. Yeah, Dallas was my only hope. Number 5, Toronto. There you go, Maple Leaf fans. I had you number 5 for the year. And again, for when one of the fascinating things about this channel, and I know people say, oh, you shouldn't pay attention to comments, but it's fascinating because from week to week, when teams move up and teams move down, there's a perception that I've got an emotional stake in it, and yet here's Toronto at number 5, and you look at where they finished overall in the NHL, and I think it was 6th or 7th overall. So technically, the Leafs skew higher than they did in the overall standings. So I found that interesting to see that, and I'm glad because I know I wasn't harsh to the Leafs. I dropped them when they weren't playing well. It's a solid future the Leafs have, and for anybody who's ready to write off Austin Matthews, and I've seen it, and before people say, oh, nobody's doing that. Oh yeah, because we're now in a society where you expect instantaneous results. That just you throw a 19, 20-year-old kid out on the ice in the playoffs against a team of battle-hardened veterans who've won a Stanley Cup, and you go on, beat them. What? Huh? Beat them. Do it. But, okay. And he tries his best, and then when he comes off the ice, and he's been kind of handed his backside by the other team, and it's like, oh, what are you? Yeah, I knew you were going to suck. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in the offseason if the Leafs do get eliminated by the Bruins, and to see what the public perception of Matthews is, because coming into this season, there was this huge, I thought, too much pressure on Matthews to become just as good as Connor McDavid, just as prolific, and he was never billed as that. And see where the public perception is now. If now maybe people are just going to underrate him into the ground, like, oh, he might score 30. I don't know. Way he played in the playoffs. We'll be lucky if he scores 25. Maybe this, it's the same thing over again. Yeah, that kind of thing. Number 4, Vegas. So we go from fan bases, and so that Leaf fans don't get too upset with my characterization. I hear it in Vancouver too. Every time the Canucks get a player, whether it's Horvat or it's Besser or it's any of them, there are those negative fans that'll be like, yeah, but how's he going to screw up? Yeah, but he just hasn't learned to be a Canuck yet. Once he learns how to be a Canuck, he'll suck. He's scoring goals because he doesn't know better yet. And it's like, okay. Vegas, they don't know better on anything, and they're glad. They are very appreciative that they're number 4 and that they weren't supposed to be here. I mean, at the start of the year, I could have seen somebody arguing Vegas could have been 28th, 27th, 26th. Sure, with that roster, sure, they could be better than some of the other teams in the NHL. But playoffs? Be lucky if they win a game. Like, this is insane. And it continues. They're number 4 here. They're number 5 on my current power rankings from last night. And they very likely will move up. I'm stunned. Stunned. At 3, Tampa. The Lightning had a truly No, that's not right. The Lightning are number 1. Yeah, the Lightning are number 1. Because I know that from the number that the Lightning are supposed to be number 1. Number 3, Nashville. Or number 3 is Winnipeg. Number 2 is Nashville. Yeah, Tampa. Winnipeg, right out of the gate, I knew Winnipeg was better than last year. And I took some heat the first few power rankings because Winnipeg, I believe I had them in the top 10. I've got the number open here somewhere. Final power rankings. I had the Winnipeg Jets the first week number 8, the second week number 9. The fourth week I had them at 6, then 8, and then 5. And I remember when I had them at 5, I saw a comment that got a bunch of upvotes with, why does Shannon have a man crush on the Winnipeg Jets? We all knew Nashville was going to be good coming out of the Stanley Cup final last year. We all knew Tampa was going to be good because Stamkos was back and healthy. And Tampa finished 1 point out of the playoffs last year. And if they'd got in, I really think they would have at least got through one round. But Winnipeg was seen as probably being right around the same. Mason wasn't seen as a huge upgrade on Hellebuck. Hellebuck had a poor season. And here we go again. And yet, even though their record wasn't fantastic, I could see that the team was better. And here we are at the end of the year. And I'm happy with the way this turns out. I know Nashville won the President's Trophy over Tampa, but Tampa was number 1 for a while, and then number 1 belonged to Nashville for a while as well. So really, there wasn't any hope for anybody to unseed those two, and we'll see if anybody unseeds them in the playoffs. I can't see it, and it's funny because, my Stanley Cup final, Tampa, Nashville, probably not going to happen, but because number 1 seeds normally don't meet each other in the playoffs. It's been a long time since that happened, but it's so hard to pick against them without having the appearance of just picking against them just to be contrarian. You know the guy who just goes, yeah, everybody's taking Tampa to win the Stanley Cup right now. I think Vancouver's got a shot. And then you point out they didn't make the playoffs, and you're like, you know what? You're not seeing the big picture. The big picture, Vancouver's going to win it. Okay. So there you go. There's the overall power rankings. A bit anticlimactic since I had these 3 in the wrong order. But that's how my power rankings work out for the entire year. Those are the average scores. That's how the average worked out. Let me know your thoughts in the comments section below. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. And hey, there will be other power rankings things that I go through because I think it's kind of fun to look back on the year we just had and discuss which teams underachieved, which ones overachieved. And I may have some serious fun with this. But anyways, you guys will see that in the coming days and weeks. But from now until then, thank you for watching. I'll talk to you again soon.